And it's Brian, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So happy spring.
Happy spring. That's exactly right. We got 1 week, right?
Yeah, no, spring starts today.
Are you sure? We turn our
Yes.
clocks back tomorrow, but I thought spring started like on the... Well, thanks for the heads up. For all our Cafecito colleagues, you're getting the down low right here, right now, accurate from Dr. Andrea Mays, UNM extraordinaire. No, I was right. It's the 20th.
Is it? Really?
Yeah, it was. All right. Good morning. It's 9:01. We've got a great Sábado Gigante in store for you. Today is going to be awesome. Good morning, Elizabeth. Welcome back. Selena Sierra. You never miss. Thank you for joining us today on Cafecito con Colón. And one of my best extrovert therapists, Sunny Kirkby, Mask Up, New Mexico. You are amazing. Hey, it's a beautiful, beautiful day in the neighborhood, right here on Cafecito con Colón, here in the land of enchantment, the Tierra del Encanto, the 47th star on that beautiful flag of the United States of America. Welcome, welcome, welcome to all my Cafecito colleagues and my Cafecito crew, and a big shout out and welcome to Dr. Andrea Mays. Dr. Mays, welcome to Cafecito con Colón.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited to spend a Saturday morning doing something different. This is great.
Hey, I am thrilled you're here. I have, in preparation for today, I saw clips of you going all the way back to like 2010, 2012 out there on the Google sphere. And
Really?
yep, so I picked up a couple things there I wanted to ask you about and really talk about maybe your perspective during this incredible Women's History Month. It's a Women's History Month that we've never had before because we've never been at this exact moment in time before. And
That's
I think
right.
we receive things differently depending on the lens that we look through during a time we look through it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And we're going to put up a few links here on Cafecito con Colón. We start out with me doing just a little bit of fun stuff and kind of news of the day, and then I'll come straight away to you, Dr. Mays. Is that all right?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So let's just begin. Good morning to everybody who's joined us this morning. Thanks for those fine comments there below. It is great to have you with us. As always, Dr. Lawrence Roy Ball. Now, talk about a Women's History Month, looking through a lens that we've never looked through before at a time we've never looked through it. Let me just start out by saying that today, as we are still in jury selection for the murder of George Floyd trial, and really I should be referring to it as the officer who's on trial for the murder of George Floyd, but I'm conflicted about naming him. But I'm happy to take your emails and your comments on that. But let me just say that today, March 13th, 1 year ago today, was the day that Breonna Taylor was killed by police in the raid, the no-knock raid. And so we reflect upon that this morning during this moment in time. And there is the link to that, prominently featured on This Day in History on history.com. Dr. Mays and I were talking before you all joined us about it being about the first day of spring. And so we are now in the last week before the first day of spring, because spring is going to happen on May 20th, which is, I think, a week from today. But what does happen this weekend as an indication of spring is that we will spring forward. We're going to turn our clocks ahead. And don't forget to do that. Daylight savings time is back. And let's see, I've got just a few other articles here today. They're not in order. I normally do my national and then my local, but today on this Sábado Gigante, you're gonna get them as they come. Let's see here. I wanted to, as you know, I am a fan of the undefeated.com, tremendous website. And this here is their social justice article that came out this week, just a few days ago, regarding the trial of officer accused of murdering George Floyd. And that officer's name is Derek Chauvin. And they picked another juror yesterday. I think just the second female juror. I think they're up to about 6 now, if I'm following this correctly. But that is the story that I wanted to bring you on the undefeated. The other thing is that we did have a great milestone yesterday in that we hit 100 million vaccines that turned into vaccinations. 100 million, folks. And what we know about that 100 million, and maybe Dr. Mays will talk a little bit about this, but we do know that we need to continue doing more and doing better about vaccine distribution to our communities of color, those who are historically on the margins and underrepresented. We know that our vaccine rates may be 13% around the country, but if you take a look at vaccine rates for people of color, we don't fare as well. So New Mexico, I will say individually, New Mexico and Hawaii, I think, no, I'm sorry, New Mexico and Alaska, we're in the top 3 no matter what data point you use, whether it's percentage of first vaccines, percentage of full vaccinations. The deployment has been amazing in New Mexico, but even New Mexico announced last week that they're going to do a better job of reaching out and making sure that there is parity in vaccine distribution as it relates to communities of color, and making sure that we are contemplating social justice when we talk about distribution of resources in New Mexico as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic, especially because we know that the negative impacts of the pandemic have far greater implications for communities of color, whether it's loss of life, whether it's hospitalizations, food insecurity, income, economic security, all the above. Getting to local, my home county really mourned deeply last night. Thank you to Dr. Howie Morales, our Lieutenant Governor, for going down to stand with the family during a vigil last night for beautiful Joseph Hobbs, 11 years old, caught in crossfire, unintended target, but gun violence took his life. And that vigil took place last night. And heavy night. I spoke to the Lieutenant Governor before he attended that, as he called me, knowing that was my home county, and he was thinking about me. And very, very deep tragedy. Very deep tragedy. Let me just also give you today's upfront by our incredible Jolene, who always is bringing great stories to New Mexico on the front page up front. Check out her piece today. It is now 9:08 on this Sabido Gigante, and we're getting ready to pivot over to our incredible guest of honor who's going to join us today and shine the light and help us think more broadly than maybe we have in the past. And I am just so thrilled to have Dr. Mays with us today. And let's see, there's about the school openings. Oh, here's 2 important stories on KRQE. This one here is regarding public input on the proposed shelter, the city's new homeless shelter that's going to go in the International District, the place where Aleli has taught for 20 years. There at Van Buren Middle School in that neighborhood. There is the city doing a good job. At least this counselor wants to make sure that there is plenty of time for public input on the Gateway Center over the old Loveless Hospital. So check that out. Make sure you give your input and go from there. On the fun side, we had, who was it? Oh, I was talking, my mentee, was it just yesterday? This is a really good story for all my Mikey Brooks of the world out there who are amazing superstar photographers. And yesterday I was visiting with Mace Graham of the Black Leadership Council, NMBLC, New Mexico Black Leadership, right? Is that right? NMBLC? Yes, New Mexico Black Leadership Council.
New Mexico Black Leadership Council, yes.
Yes, please forgive me, Ms. McGill, my honorary doctoral, Ms. McGill. It is New Mexico Black Leadership Council. The good news, even though I wasn't confident I had it right, I had it right. So let me just be clear on that. Because we're going to talk about NMBLC today because Dr. Mays is going to bring the heat. She's got Dirty Computer coming at you live with Afro-futurism from our screens to reality. She's coming up. She's closing the trifecta of presenters on March 24th. In fact, let me give you, so you can register while you're listening to me. I'm going to give you an opportunity to register for this. It's free, brought to you by the New Mexico Black Leadership Council, shining the spotlight on excellence in Afrofuturism. From our screens to reality, Dr. Mays will bring Dirty Computer, Janelle Monáe. Did I get that right, Janelle Monáe?
Janelle Monáe.
Hey, that was pretty good, huh? Not bad. Not bad for a redheaded freckle-faced guy. Just trying to be worthy of your presence today, Dr. Mays. Let me see here. So there you go. So I got distracted. Check this out. So Mace, if you're watching today, my dear Mace from NMBLC, I know you got some good talent behind the lens. So the city of Albuquerque is calling on photographers to take photos of the metro area. So get in there, get registered, get in there and help with this crowdsourcing of awesome photographs. So with that, it is 9/11, and I'm going to pivot early because I think Dr. Mays has a lot of stuff to share with us, and I want to maximize the time we have together and the opportunity we have together to hear from this incredible leader at the University of New Mexico. She is not just with the Department of American Studies and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. She's also their undergraduate advisor. She's the Provost General Education Teaching Fellow on Race and Social Justice. Let me tell you, talk about intersectionality. This woman is absolutely top shelf and awesome. And we're just so pleased to be able to have her with us today. Let me just say her short bio says that she holds a PhD in American Studies, focusing on the 20th and 21st century African American culture and politics, visual culture, and gender studies. What a beautiful time to bring her on when we celebrate Women's History Month. We've just come off of Black History Month. And I remember a couple of my guests last month saying, don't you be telling me about celebrating Women's History Month if you don't bring any women of color on as you're celebrating Women's History Month. So let me just say, Dr. Mays has intersectionality all over the place. So she also has a master's in comparative literature and cultural studies and a BA in communications from George Mason University. Dr. Mays is a Mellon Fellow, Mellon Fellow, the UNM's provost. I already told you about all the great titles she has. She's an award-winning lecturer. She teaches courses in feminist studies, film, literature, and race and class, and gender studies. And let me just say that there is stuff all over out there about Dr. Mays, but let me just go on to say that she's got articles published in not just the Albuquerque Journal, not just the Santa Fe Reporter, not just these local New Mexico, but also in the USA Today. She was in Letters to Our Daughters, directed by native New Mexican filmmaker Christopher Roybal, which was narrated by somebody we talked about yesterday, the incredible Dolores Huerta. And, she was the co-founder of the AFL-CIO's United Farm Workers, and we talked about her being the one who coined the phrase "Si se puede," and the one who has been under-celebrated. But in New Mexico, we lift her up as we have the one and only intersection where the streets come together that are Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez. Avenida Cesar Chavez and Avenida Dolores Huerta come together right there at our incredible National Hispanic Cultural Center in the historic Morelos neighborhood. And so let me just say, it is an honor to be able to host such a phenomenal leader. She has been on panels with all kinds of superstars like Marissa Tomei, Hugo, and an Emmy award-winning New Mexico. We've adopted him as a native, but George R.R. Martin of Game of Thrones. So let me just say, she's got tons of accolades, tons of opportunities to speak with strength, credibility, and real vision. And it is an honor and privilege to have you on Cafecito con Colón. Dr. Mays, bienvenidos.
Thank you so much for that warm and generous welcome. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate the time.
You betcha. You betcha. Dr. Mays, I didn't get too much into your journey into where you are today versus where you came from. And I always think that framing and helping us understand the lens you look through is really important as we spend the next 45 minutes together kind of visiting about different areas and topics. It's important for people to understand, when I look at you, I see a powerful, intellectual, highly skilled, highly versed, well-knowledged woman of color, which in and of itself being able to call you Dr. Mays makes you exceptional and inspirational when young women of color look up and see a reflection of themselves. When you looked up and didn't see a reflection of yourself as often as you should have, tell us about that time in the life of Dr. Mays.
Well, Brian, I come from Chicago, actually the south side of Chicago, about, I don't know, 6 miles from where Michelle Obama was born and raised. And I grew up in a working class neighborhood. It was a sort of first generation, middle class, working class neighborhood during the period when folks of color, particularly African Americans, were able to get good factory jobs, still mill jobs and factory jobs on the south side of Chicago. And my family was one of three families in the community that I grew up that were instrumental in integrating the neighborhood that I grew up in. It was before we moved there and the two other families moved onto our block. It was largely a white neighborhood. It was a white working class, still working class neighborhood. But what I like to think of as the climbers, like people who want something better, who work hard, and earnest, good, hardworking American folk. And that is the case largely, I believe, in the working class and working poor segment of American society. Often our communities are vilified because of the structural challenges that we're confronted with and the struggles that we have. But you know, I was lucky in a lot of ways in that working class, striving community on the south side of Chicago, because there were people in my community that I could look up to. Like I remember my eighth grade social studies teacher, Miss Washington. I remember, there are these people. I had a drama, Miss Colquitt, my sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade drama teacher. Jackie Taylor, who later I would come to know founded a theater company. She was my seventh grade drama coach. So in theater and performance, there was a rich legacy of teachers, and it was largely teachers, right? Who, no matter what the other challenges were I was confronted with as a young woman of color, in my school, there were people who saw me, right? And that's tremendously important. At the pace of life we live at now, I think that young people, particularly young women, find themselves in an interesting double bind, right? Young women of color, dropout rates are increasing, issues of young women of color being incarcerated, being vilified and also targeted by not only school security, by police. You mentioned the anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death. Like, these are the social facts of life, which reflect back a hostile terrain to young women of color across a spectrum of identities. And while that was also, I'm sure, some of what was there for me on the South Side, I had a community of women who gave me some examples of alternatives to that violence and social sort of antagonism that was out there for me. The pace of the world that we live in now, the structures that exist and how they're set up, and particularly in the era of social media, which can be so damaging and destructive, right? To young people in general, but certainly the media to women of color, right? There are multiple venues where women of color find themselves and young girls find themselves objectified in particular ways in social media. There's bullying, antagonism, all of this other stuff. And also this disconnect between yourself as an acceptable figure, right? Based on who is being championed and how you fit in a dynamic where the tendency is to feel anonymous and unseen, right? So there's this interesting dichotomy between an over visibility with young women of color, right? Because you can post pictures on social media, but it's not exactly helping young women find within themselves a centering, a grounding, a sense of their true worth, right? The 5 minutes of fame or 15 minutes of fame that Andy Warhol warned us of 40 years ago, right, is not deeply enriching necessarily, right? And helping young women of color develop a sense of themselves, a sense of their worth, a sense of their value, a sense of their unique beauty, a sense of their, and when I say beauty, I mean throughout, right? Social media is two-dimensional. It doesn't give the opportunity to do that. And I find women of color in those kinds of contexts are often targeted in particular ways that are destructive and damaging. And probably one of the cases that is perhaps another example of overdetermination, right? In terms of this is an overrepresented case, but it's also an example of how women of color, and particularly Black women, can get targeted by social media, is the case of Meghan Markle in the British press, right? As a person of African descent, right? That forces this larger conversation. But what Meghan Markle is dealing with at the scale that she's dealing with it at, the kinds of hostility and anti-Black and anti-female, right? Psychological violence that happens on social media happens to women of color around the world all the time at various levels of society.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. Because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, thank you for that. I mean, a beautiful opening and giving us a lot of landscape to cover there. I mean, there's so much that you can speak to, and you do it so eloquently. I wanted to kind of maybe use the Merkel example, as an opportunity for you to speak a little more specifically about, I read about your dissertation. I wasn't able to find your dissertation online, but I was able to read about your work in trying to really wrap your head around and quantify and maybe get some narrative going about what the early 20th century representations were, domestically and normativity by African Americans. And I wondered kind of a little bit more about that and the work you did back then on your PhD, where I just have to believe that, like, your dissertation probably was received one way then, and I think today in March of 2021, that work would be received differently. And you didn't say I'm right or wrong, but that's when I was thinking about our time together this morning, that's how I felt. That was my instant reaction.
As I've gone back into it and started working on it again and reshaping it, just actually in the last few months, for a monograph for a book. You're right. I'm thinking about it differently. But one of the key, so the early 20th century in the United States, late 19th, early 20th century in the United States, there in American cultural politics in the public realm, was an overt articulation of the shaping of what it meant to be an American. And many people have talked about this. I mean, this was the point at which this discourse of Americanism, right, emerged, and what it was to be an American, which largely meant even Teddy Roosevelt, right? This concept of 100% Americanism. This was about a domestic-born, heteronormative, white, middle class, largely rural, right? Second generation, right? Identity, which, if you think about the various groups that are in tension right now, right, around issues of justice and rights, don't fit into that category. We're talking 100 years later, right? We're still having these issues. One of the challenges that the U.S. As a nation is confronted with is living up to, and various public figures have said this isn't new, living up to the promise that it made initially, right? Within the Constitution, right? Within the Constitution, trying to reconcile the fact of slavery, and the fact that people of African descent were considered 3/5 human being for representation, which is not human, right? And trying to reconcile the fact that, at the same time this is written into the Constitution, we are saying we're a nation of laws and we're a nation for liberty and freedom and the pursuit of happiness, right? And the initial, so the initial conflict emerged in the founding, not only in the founding of the document, but in the founding of the nation. And I believe that it has persistently been America's inability to reconcile its conscience with its aspirations toward its people, right? And who we're going to be. That has been the driving force behind the tensions that continue to percolate up. So when we talk about 100% Americanism, which is so narrowly defined, right? Not only narrowly defined in 1915, right? Because of how it so, clearly excludes people of African descent, but also narrowly defined in that it excludes many Americans.
Right.
Right. And there's a persistent desire to have this definition and along with it, this rhetoric around the melting pot be the mantle on which, under which the US launches its or continues to launch a discourse of inclusion, while simultaneously through immigration policies, through government policies, restricting access to all. So normativity, so the definition that I just gave you roughly is the normative definition of what it is to be American. So everybody outside of that normative definition, right, is considered a non-normative subject, right? And it is under the ideology, right, from various levels of government, ideologies of race and gender and class, because baked into that idea of 100% Americanism is also baked into the idea, it is also the idea that those who are outside of this terrain are non-normative.
Right.
Right. So we see at various points in society.
Before you go to that thought, can I insert just something that maybe you could think about? Because I've certainly thought about it, and I'm not smart enough to really do the analysis, but it does strike me. And I guess I've been thinking about it ever since I was directed to page 2 of the New York Times, I think it was, or the Washington Post, when we were trying to get statehood, and they talked about greasers. And the last paragraph in that op-ed was something like, not sure that this free love bunch of essentially brown people should be a part of our union. I'm paraphrasing, but go check it out. And thank you, Dr. Mathewson, Dean Mathewson, for sending me that article, so I didn't have to go look for it, or pay for it, I should say. I wonder if you could take what you just talked about, that 100% Americanism, to the exclusion of all others, right? Like that's the piece, right? I wonder if you could also do the analysis, and just something to think about, but the whole idea that in 1912, and that when we were a territory, New Mexico is fundamentally different, because we never did say 100% Americanism, because we are the only state in the union that is officially bilingual. We're the only state in the union that from the onset said, wait a minute, there's differences here, and we're going to respect and honor those differences. Not to say we get it right, or that we've even met those aspirational goals, but at least we started with that aspirational goal, which I think is different than just about any other state. In fact, I know it is. And so I wonder how did that position us structurally in the context of what you just talked about from 100 years ago? Like, not only was it in that editorial, like imagine that moment in time, 100% Americanism, and we're trying to become a state. And at the same time, we're trying to say, but don't forget we're different. Because we're not going to erase our history. We're not going to be to the exclusion of all others. And in fact, in a very unique way, we're going to embrace that heritage of having been, Mexico, Spain, now New Mexico. I mean, like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the land, I mean, our history is just so different. And then you come at it from a lens of Chicago, where you look around and you can't see somebody who doesn't look like you. And then you come to New Mexico and you're at the 3% level and you're going, where are my peeps?
Well,
And it's a tricultural state, which is the most offensive thing somebody can say to somebody who's paying attention. So you go from Chicago to that. Like, I don't know. I don't mean to go on a rift, and I don't
no,
want
no,
to
no,
take,
no.
but
I think what you're saying, it's, I teach a race class and ethnicity class, or I used to at UNM. It's an entry level course on this very topic. And one of the things that I have my students, many of which are from New Mexico, think about is why New Mexico was one of the last states
right. We
admitted in.
talked about it this week. It was
Right,
racism. It was
right,
fundamental racism.
right. Racism, uh, a language bias. It's like we can't have all these brown people, and English isn't, there are not enough English speaking people living in New Mexico. And there was actually some effort to incentivize like white English speaking people to move to New Mexico in order to allow it to be admitted to the state. I mean, I think admitted to the state of the union, right? And I think that that is exactly it. And these tensions, the proximity, right? You asked me to think about it in terms of a lens. There's a couple. There's a temporal proximity that the state of New Mexico is in terms of its relationship to the union, in terms of being admitted late. And then there's a national perception about New Mexico, right, as being located somehow in a marginal space, right? And I think for a number of reasons that have to do with some of those baked in biases about where we are in relationship to the border, where we are as a state that is a state of First Nations people, right? This is a state with, that is more overtly one occupied by indigenous folks than any state I've ever visited. And I've visited quite a few states, right? So I think, those are factors in the racialization of New Mexico, right? It also has to do
When you
with
say racialization, what exactly does that mean to our viewers today?
the way that New Mexico as a space comes to be understood within the ideology of race and class, right? The way that all of these factors come together to shape New Mexico as a space that is understood as non-white and somehow fundamentally non-American, right? By the sort of biased terms, right? So the way that we never have, there are ways that people never have to ever say race, but you understand who they're talking about because there is an ideology informed by politics and culture and history, right? And art and popular culture that informs our understanding of how we understand these folks, right? It's kind of the way there's some sociologists, Howard, Michael Omi and Howard Wernot, that wrote this theory called racial formations theory. And some of the things that you have to consider to understand, to develop a critique of race that allows you to see how race is operating, not only in terms of how it manifests physically in somebody, right, which is the sort of reductive way that we understand race, but also how it informs our understanding ideologically, like how we understand class, how we say, so-and-so's too ghetto. Yeah. Like we haven't said anything about race.
Right.
Right. But by ghetto, we have geographically located somebody, right? We have, in terms of class, located somebody, right? In our framework. We have also located them in terms of a racial identity, right? And what is most particular about it is it may not be brown, it may not be specifically brown or specifically Black, but we know that it's somewhere in that range, right? It's non-white, right? So that's what I mean by racialization. The way that race, sort of the understanding of race historically informed, culturally, politically, and economically understood informs our understanding of another human being. Right? Which has oftentimes very little to do with that human being and who they are, right? In our encounter with them. So that's exactly. New Mexico is situated that way because of some of these factors, right?
No question. No question. And it gets back to being seen,
Right, being
right?
seen.
Right?
Are you being seen, or is the cultural, political, and historical freight of who you are
Right.
being seen,
Right.
right?
I love that. I mean, thank you for pointing us that way. I think that's an important thing. And Jonathan Muniz, yes, I see you. And thank you for that comment. And we're glad that Catherine McGill is with us today. Big props, big shout out. Lots of love to my Catherine McGill. She takes me to school, probably on a monthly basis. She takes me to school and educates me. And we're grateful for the work she does with the New Mexico Black Leadership Council. And of course, she's here because she only shows up when I have my best guests. And Dr. Mays, you're one of my best guests. Tell me more about, I think some folks will be surprised to learn, I put up this virtual background. I had a lot of my friends from New Mexico State give me trouble saying that, hey, when you have UNM guests on, you don't put up your UNM background. How come you had the New Mexico State background when you had Dean Fame on the other day, and you put up the logo background? So here you go, folks. There's my administrative building, not Scholes Hall. Wait, is it Scholes Hall?
Yes.
Scholes, right?
Yeah. Well, Shows Hall.
Yeah, Scholes. I grew up under Scholes Hall. It could be Scholes Hall, but there's the administration building at the University of New Mexico. Beautiful, beautiful Pueblo architecture. And my dog is wrecking my office here. Hold on one second. Negrito, watch out. I'm sorry, Dr. Mays. I have a little crisis here of my dog who's like 120 years old, literally in dog years. And he's in his final days, and he can't see and he can't hear, and you just hear his little paws running around the house. And
but living in the space of love, right?
Oh, are you kidding? My goodness.
Yeah.
He is beloved. He's been with us almost as long as my son. And he's been with me 23 years. So I lost track. Scholes Hall. Oh, I was going to say John Gaumim and our Pueblo architecture that is so beautiful here in New Mexico, represented in this building. And yes, I'm flying the UNM flag today because we have a UNM superstar. And some would be surprised to learn, maybe not a lot, but some would be surprised to learn that we have a department of, I want to get it right. Is it Feminism Studies?
Women, the
Program.
official department name is Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies.
But there's a subset, at least I found on the internet, there was a landing page for like feminism studies or feminist studies.
There's the Feminist Research Institute, which
That's the one.
is a wonderful, important organization. I actually am on the board of the Feminist Research Institute.
That's the one I'm thinking of. Tell us
Yes.
about that, because that was fascinating to me. I'm going to find the link again. No, it's not there. Okay, I'm going to find the link while you talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a really important, the Feminist Research Institute is a really important scholarly and research arm at the University of New Mexico, and it came out of a number of projects which emerged out of the UNM Women's Resource Center. It's a distinct body from the UNM Women's Resource Center, as well as Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. It's understood as the research arm. We give grants for scholars, faculty, and graduate students, and support the scholarly work at the University of New Mexico. We actually just nominated a new director. Initially, it was under, until about 2 months ago, it was under the leadership of Dr. Elizabeth Hutchinson, who's in the history department and who is also with the Division of Equity and Inclusion right now. But we have our, one of my colleagues in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies is the current director of the FRI, Dr. Francisco Galarte. And I'm very excited about his work. He just actually published a book called Brown Transfigurations, which is about trans masculinities and Chicano identity. And I'm looking very forward to reading that. There was actually a book signing, not a book signing, but a talk this week on that. But there's quite a growing, an intense, a fertile ground for feminist studies at UNM across a range of fields. Those are the three key departments, but there are people doing feminist scholarship across UNM's academic College of Arts and Sciences. And I'm just happy to be a part of it on any level. I really enjoy working with, hearing the thoughts of, and reading the work of my colleagues. It's an exciting and generative time. And to me, as someone with a longer history of UNM, because I was a grad student at UNM
Oh,
as
I missed
well.
that part. Is that how
Pardon
you
me?
got here? I missed that part. I didn't realize that, I guess. I was thinking,
Yeah, I was a grad student at UNM. And so I've seen a number of iterations for the various departments, and it's been encouraging. In the last 4 or 5 years, it's been interesting to watch various communities get galvanized around the politics of the moment, right? Particularly since like 2015 to now. It's been an interesting moment to see discussions unfold, analysis and work come out of the political moments that we've been living through. And I think I mentioned to you, because of the nature of the politics in our public sphere lately around the Trump administration, it's been, it's forced. There have been a lot of challenging moments for everybody. I think not the least of which was the January 6th insurrection, right? That was a stark moment for everybody. But prior to that, there were a number of moments that were challenging, and particularly challenging for women because, President Trump enters the stage as a very galvanizing figure, for or against him. I mean, and multiple sort of iterations in between in terms of support for him. And forces, I think, or forced a lot of conversations that folks in the US and folks around the globe hadn't been having in a very public way around issues of gender, right, and race and class, that they were forced to then have, because arguably the most powerful person in the nation was speaking and acting in ways that made us question our beliefs and values about the US and what we aspire to be versus how we're being represented to be, right?
right, right. So I was thinking that and I see your diploma behind you now, University of New Mexico, and so I don't know what I was thinking, because I knew that I read some of your posts and articles from back when you were working on your doctoral degree, UNM. Let me ask you, in terms of perception and perspective, in this moment in time, because I'm really fascinated with the way we receive everything, like these filters that have just, I think, helped us to be more receptive. I was going to say sensitive, but I don't think it's that. I think it's receptive to actually seeing and hearing other, not points of view, but other dialogue, other narratives that we wouldn't necessarily have received before. So I was fascinated because I watched the whole 10-minute interview, mostly because I'm jealous, because no news station has ever given me 10 minutes of an interview. But you were awesome and so charming. Let me tell you, you owned that interview. This was back in 2000. This is about a decade ago. And it was, I think, regarding the Oscars.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I watched the whole interview. And it was a perfect, I hope you receive this the way I intended. I hope it comes out the way I intended. But it was a perfect example of the moment of time we're in. Because that whole 10-minute interview a decade ago, nothing came up about underrepresentation in those awards. And it struck me. And it just really struck me, because you embody all the things we should be thinking about right now, Dr. Mays. And that's why it struck me so heavily. when I was preparing for today to be with you, because I wanted to be worthy of your time. I really respect the work you've done and the things I've read about you. And Dr. Gomez Chavez, Dr. Roybal, you've got so many colleagues that respect you so much, and so receive this hopefully in the way it's intended. But it would seem to me to be a perfect example of the moment in time, because it never came up. 10 minutes. I mean, you talked about everything from the glitz to the backs of the actresses to, I mean, you covered a lot in 9.5 or 10 minutes, but
Mm-hmm.
not once did underrepresentation come up. And I
Mm-hmm.
just wonder how you think about that now, a decade later. Because I guess here's my point. If you were to do that interview today, man, that'd be front and center in that conversation. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree. And I think that one of the things that when I think about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, even if you try to steer the conversation, and I'm not really sure which interview that was or where it
Fair enough.
was local
Sorry.
TV or something. No, that's okay. One of the things that people are often unwilling to talk about, right, is race in particular and
Totally.
class. So and sometimes issues of race get conflated or dismissed, and people want to focus on class, right, or people want to focus on gender. And I'm going to say, you've used the term intersectionality several times. And what I would say to that is, we don't ever show up to any place one thing. I never show up any place just a woman or just Black, right? Or just from a working class background. I show up simultaneously, all of these various sort of existential embodiments, but also much more than that can't be seen. And when folks, I think, if I'm thinking correctly, was it, Melissa McCarthy, they were talking about women in the Oscars?
No,
Really?
it was more general. It was two wonderful women who were interviewing you, and
Okay.
I couldn't tell you who they are because I really was struck with you. You really warmed up the whole. It was a very warm
Oh,
and charming interview.
well, cinema is my love.
Okay.
Like I love cinema in a way that I have to remind myself, okay, you can only go to so many movies. When we went to movies, right? You can only go to so many movies in a month,
I
right?
miss it. I miss
Yeah,
it big time.
yeah, me
Go
too.
ahead. Sorry.
But no, but I can't yeah, I'm at a loss for why that happened, but I also know that the questions that folks often want to give you are not questions that they're uncomfortable with. And one of and if I think I remember the segment early morning television,
I
right?
I think that's what it was. It was like a Good Morning New Mexico or
Right.
something like
Is
that.
not a space that even 10 years ago in New Mexico was wanting to put these issues front and center. Like for me, these issues are always front and center. And so, it gets really dicey. And I've been in a number of forums with folks where I've tried to like lead the conversation back to, what I want to talk about. And there you could just see the faces on them going, no, I don't want to talk about this. But I think anytime we have an opportunity to talk about these issues, I think it is important. And sometimes when you're put in a predicament where you want to talk about the issues and the context doesn't allow it, it creates an antagonism, right? For the folks who you're trying to talk to, which doesn't permit another opportunity later on. What I will say, I know that later on, the subsequent show that I did with them, I think was Women in the Oscars, and it was, we talked a little bit about Lupita Nyong'o, and we talked a little bit about representation in the Oscars. But the conversation by that time came around was the conversation around Oscars so white, right? The hashtag Oscars so white.
Right.
Sometimes we're just outside of the zeitgeist, right? And sometimes we're in the middle of it. But I think I think we're in another moment that I would call an inflection point. But whether we're in an inflection point or not, these issues of marginalization, even when the person that you should, or the type of people that you should be talking about is right in front of you, it doesn't happen. I don't know. Are you familiar with the late great Gwen Eiffel?
No, let me just say that I met the late great Gwen Eiffel, and she still has family here in New Mexico, who I have the pleasure of knowing, and we used to at least do Easter dinner together. I don't know why Easter, but she is now with another one of kind of my inspirational figures here in Albuquerque. And I'm not going to disclose names because they're pretty private, but they're kind of big deals. But you'd never know it when you meet them. He was one of the founders of Albuquerque, I'll just say, and he's still with us. But he and she are beautiful people, and I've shared stories with her about how wonderful. I met Gwen at, I guess it was a DNC convention. She was on panel, and Aleli and I were out there, and she walked by, and I went, "Are you kidding?" And so then I was, one of those inappropriate people who went and followed, and then said, just real quick, one of those deals. So yes, that's a long way to say yes. Please proceed. Sorry, it was a great memory. I have a warm memory of her.
I have many. I used to work for the Freedom Forum in DC, and I produced some public programming on women in the media with Gwen Eiffel. But what I wanted to talk about was the 2008 debates that Gwen Eiffel hosted, presidential debates.
So now you're taking me to the time I met her. That was really? About the time. It was either 8 or 12. Anyway, go ahead. That's awesome.
Well, Gwen Eiffel asked the presidential candidates about AIDS and the disproportionate number of women of color who were dying of AIDS globally, right? And the candidates refused to answer her questions. Even as Gwen Eiffel, a woman of color, sat in front of them attempting to sort of poke back at their failure to address these questions. And that was one of the moments. I actually wrote a piece for UNM's Women's Resource Center newsletter about it. But that was one of the moments wherein, it was clear to me, it was like, okay, so this is how this unfolds. Even when you want to talk about the issues that people of color or women of color or marginalized groups, poverty, it's profoundly disconcerting to me that no one wants to talk about poverty. We always want to talk about the middle class in an election cycle, right? But not everybody is the middle class. There are people who are the working poor, right? So, but Gwen Eiffel redirected a question about AIDS, the global pandemic of AIDS that still hadn't gone away, that we're still dealing with today. And none of the candidates would answer the question, right? And finally, Gwen Eiffel just moved on, right? Because it's like, okay, this is one of those moments when people just don't want to deal with what's in front of them. And sometimes that happens. In our current political context, people want to get past the last 4 years, a lot of folks. Let's move on. We need positive things. Let's heal. Got it. I hear that, right? Everybody should want to heal. It has been a profoundly psychologically violent period, not only with the loss of death, with 500,000 Americans dead, but also with the other incidents, right? Children in cages at the border, right? People falling into deeper poverty in this country, the disproportionate impact of Blacks and Latinos by COVID, right? There are all of these things that we want to move past. The reality is that there is no moving past. There is no healing without reconciliation, and there is no reconciliation without responsibility, right? So if those things don't happen at various levels of the United States government and at various levels of our community and our politics, then we are going to be, as they say, in a state of deja vu all over again real soon, right? This stuff is not going to go away. Truth and reconciliation are important. I start with truth and reconciliation, right? And there are a lot of profoundly disturbing lies still circling, the blogosphere, the cultural and political context around how the last 5 years have gone in this country, even most recently the presidential election, that we're not dealing with, and that too many people in power are not admitting at a national level. So they don't want to talk about it. Again, we're back to sort of deflection and denial,
Sure.
right? And what it permits toxicity and violence, and that manifests economically, politically, socially, medically, culturally, at every level of our society.
You bring up something that I've been intending to try and shine the spotlight on and have a discussion about that we haven't yet. I've been doing this Cafecito con Colon for almost a full year now. I think we're about 10 days out from the anniversary of when I started this. And I've been so well educated by my guests every single day that I've hosted an episode, but we haven't talked a lot about that concept of toxicity, particularly male toxicity. But the concept, even in itself, you can, in debate, we talk about chunking it up, chunking up the issue so you could, ratchet down, which would be the male toxicity. But there's a broader, just the whole concept of toxicity in itself, which I don't think people have a good understanding of. And so I don't think we have time to talk about that today, but I appreciate you bringing that up because it is something I want to come back to. You've been amazing. I posted a beautiful article in the Boston Globe that was somewhat of a tribute to the life of Gwen Eiffel. I will just say that it highlights and spotlights her very difficult question about
excellent. Great.
and women of color in the United States. And but we do have a deep connection to her right here in Albuquerque, and just beautiful connection. Anyway, thank you for bringing up Gwen. Let me just close because I want to be respectful of your time, and I hope that someday you'll come back because I think there's a lot to unpack here. And I did post your sign up link about 2 times, and I'm going to do third time's a charm right now. I'm going to put my last link up after wishing happy birthday to all those good folks like Senator Linda Lopez and Luis Hernandez Jr. and Chanel Weesey. We want to just say happy birthday to all those great folks out there. There's a sign up link for the 24th, I think, with it, which is Afrofuturism. Is that the 24th? Do I have that right?
It's the 24th, yes.
3-part
Wednesday,
series.
the 24th.
3-part series. I think it's at 4 o'clock. Is that right?
It's at 4 p.m. Yes, Mountain Time.
Excellent.
And it's definitely sponsored by the Black Leadership Council. I'm just honored to be counted among the amazing scholars that they've invited to do it. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about Afrofuturism as a political and aspirational practice, also as a means through which to understand Black visions, Black people's visions of themselves in a larger context, temporally and spatially than we live in right now in this moment in the United States. So I'm excited. I'm very excited.
I love it. Dr. Mays, you've made my Sabido Gigante on this beautiful 13th day of March wonderful. And if the day ended right now, I would have had a great day because you were a part of it. Thank you for joining me. Thanks for all your time. I'm going to ask you one last question. I'll let you have the last word as I try and do with my guests, but I don't always succeed. But I am today going to give you the last word. But I have one more question. And that is, if you rolled around and you looked to your bookshelf behind you, what's the hidden gem that had a good impact that maybe a lot of us have never heard about, read, or seen that would make us better human beings because you introduced us to the work?
Wow. Just one, huh?
You just one.
Okay. I think James Mcbride's The Color of Water.
Okay.
And it's a memoir. It's a memoir by a Black man, and it's a tribute to his white mother. But it is a snapshot of 1970s interracial politics in the United States and New York. So that's a memoir. That's a particular kind of book. Um, Another book that I think there are others. Another book that I think would be profoundly, I don't know, just interesting to read is a book called To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, and it's written by Lorraine Hansberry. It's it's a biography. I would argue it's a biography. Excuse me. It was composed by her husband, but it's a compilation of some of her speeches, some of her words, how she authorizes herself as an important figure. And I think that it's wonderful. And then, all right, see, you said one, but
And here she goes. Go ahead.
okay. So
I'm posting links as we go. I've got both links up. I'm ready for your next.
okay, then there's Margaret Walker. This Is My Century. Margaret Walker is a really important African-American writer and cultural figure, political activist, right? And that's a book of poetry. And then I'm a lover of poetry. And then Kevin Young, who I think is currently the director of the Schomburg Center for the Institute of Black Culture in New York. But some years ago, he published a book when he was going through the loss of his father called The Art of Losing, Poems of Grief and Healing. Right. And I think about this moment when we've lost 500,000 Americans, that would be a good book to read about and think about.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's a beautiful final recommendation based on this moment in time we're in, as we've just rounded out the 1 year mark for trying to live together, grow together, be compassionate together, be understanding together, and trying to make sure that we reach out to those who are in isolation and make sure they know that they're not alone, whether it be our young people, our veterans, our people of color who have maybe become exhausted with the conversation. I
Yes.
think on this anniversary of Breonna Taylor's murder, during the jury selection, uh, I just think I almost feel like I can understand it, but I'm not sure that I can. But the level of exhaustion that particularly Black men and Black women have right now, after this year of awakening, maybe I want to say awakening in a positive way, but that has caused us to reach out to people like Dr. Mays and ask them again and again the same questions over and over again that we have failed to ask in the past because we have failed to see the beauty and the complexity of people like Dr. Mays. And you have been so gracious in allowing us to ask those questions again and again and help us become more enriched and more enlightened and better human beings, because we cannot have empathy, we cannot have community if we don't see one another. And I appreciate you allowing us to see you today, Dr. Mays.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to see you, Brian. It's been a pleasure. And I would welcome the opportunity to come and chat with you another time on another topic.
We will do that. I'm not even going to do my bumper music because I just think you have beautifully landed this plane, and your smile lights up the room just like it did on that interview 10 years ago that I saw. Sorry to blindside you on that and not give you the context, but I
No,
did.
that's okay. That's all right. That's the thing about the internet. When you say something, it's out there forever, right? So
That's right.
it's fine. It's fine.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Have a terrific day.
You
Enjoy your
too.
weekend.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Join us again on Monday. We'll be back here with another great episode, shining the light on excellence in New Mexico and lifting up New Mexico and all 2.1 million of us who make this the land of enchantment, the Tierra del Encanto, the 47 star on that beautiful flag of the United States of America. Bye-bye, everybody.